never alone. To everything there is a season and a time, to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 to 2. Those of us who knew Mrs. Fearon and loved Mrs. Fearon will continue to remember her all the days of our lives. Many of us in the Bahamas know her as a young Mrs. Fearon, and those in Jamaica only know her as an elderly Mrs. Fearon. As a tribute to Mrs. Fearon, if God so gives me the strength, I will put together a memory book telling her story, telling about her life. She was victorious over many troubles, and she continued to have joy all the days of her life. She did have a time to be born, a time to grow, a time to live her life to the fullest, a time to slow down, and finally, a time to die. Many of us knew her at different times in her life, but all of us have learned to love the essence of the real Mrs. Fearon. The first reading at her funeral was from Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. Father Barrington Jones asked us in his homily, what time is it for each of us in our lives? We can be in a time for mourning, or a time for remembrance, or even a time for healing. Like Mrs. Fearon did, we must always remember that God is with us, even at the time of our death. He will never leave us or forsake us. We are never alone. We should not be afraid. God is with us. God also promised to hear us, to help us, and to heal us. Some may think that it is a sad thing to be a childless widow. But though seemingly alone in life, Mrs. Fearon was never alone. She spent her days teaching in various school systems in Jamaica, in Canada, and for the majority of her life in the Bahamas. Sponsoring children and causes and adopting her daughter Pearline and mentoring thousands of students over the years, Mrs. Fearon did not live an empty life. As a social studies and English teacher, she traveled far and wide, embracing the cultures that many only experienced vicariously, in a reality of actually walking the pathways of the historic places in books that she and her students used. She never was really alone because she knew that she had Jesus. Many of us knew her as our teacher at St. Augustine's College and also as the representative for the American Institute for Foreign Study, better known as the AIFS, which later became the ACIS. With her, many of us met students from all continents and traveled to many places, taking courses at many European colleges. I was delighted to see that Mrs. Fearon treasured these memories as much as we treasured our memories of these tours. Mrs. Fearon was also an independent woman. She did not need a man to make her feel fulfilled. She only needed Jesus. Just as she was disciplined in her personal life, she was also very disciplined in her professional life. Many did not embrace her with openness because of this, but those of us who became her beloved, we saw a genuine love for people and a tenacity that conquered all fears. Over the years as a student and later as an adult, I spent many enjoyable hours with Mrs. Fearon. As many of you call her Aunt Enid, she had also asked me to do so too, but I continued to call her Mrs. Fearon. But that name did not make our relationship any less intimate. She watched me grow into adulthood, begin my dating and college years, and supported me emotionally as I became a wife and a mother. I spent nights at her apartment when I felt my heart was breaking during those dating years, and I spent hours on the telephone with her when I was far away from her and I just needed advice or a sounding board as I discussed my plans in life. Because of my experience with her, my entire family became a friend, and my mother and her and Mrs. Fearon became close friends, talking about everything under the sun and traveling together to many foreign lands. When Mrs. Fearon returned to Jamaica, my mother and Mrs. Fearon continued to chat weekly, and I continued my friendship with her. My siblings all had a special relationship with her. I called her on the telephone even when she was ailing, and she remembered me. Many of the students and staff of St. Augustine's College, Nassau, also had a close relationship with her. I am not the only person. Why was Mrs. Fearon never alone? She was never alone because she was a spiritual person. She loved her faith, and she used the tools within the church to bring her comfort and joy. She loved the hymns, and she enjoyed the rituals attending Christ Church Cathedral, downtown Nassau, and St. Boniface Anglican Church in Kingston, Jamaica. Those who came out to celebrate her life attest to the fact that there is more to life than marriage and having children. The greatest gift we give to others is our love and teaching others how to love God. Mrs. Fearon did just that. May she rest in peace.